All right, guys. Wow. Mona Sambunani, hello, how's it going? Nant, shalom, good evening. I am super. Can I just ask for your forgiveness for being so late on the show? It's been a very interesting day. It's been a very interesting day, and it's delayed me a little bit. My stock standard of being on time for issues is not the case today, and I'm really sorry about that. And with that being said, let me perhaps hop straight into the show. Tonight's going to be a humdinger of a show as I really unpack a issue which I've been wanting to talk about for a very long time. It's a divisive issue, which ironically is exactly what I would argue, and I'll make my arguments, of course, at the end. It's a divisive issue which I'd argue is partially the purpose of the people behind this sort of movement. As you guys would know on this show, the values I fight for are faith, flag, family, and freedom. And at the heart of these values is the ideas and the goal, if you will, of building a South Africa, a property-earning, prosperous, non-racial, and free South Africa. It's that non-racial part which I think we're going to zoom in today as we have the conversation around, firstly, what is Black Lives Matter? That's going to be revealed tonight on the the Black Lives Matter show, on the Big Daddy Liberty show. That's going to be revealed tonight. You are going to have a strong command, a strong grasp of exactly what it is to say that you are pledging support or pledging allegiance, if you will, to the Black Lives Matter organization movement, because there is a very big difference, for those of you who've been paying attention to me online, between saying Black Lives Matter as a statement that you might just be waxing lyrical about versus saying you're pledging support for Black Lives Matter. And we're going to have a very interesting conversation tonight with, I'm going to have a litany of guests come through from Gabriel Krause, who of course is a analyst and researcher at the Institute of Race Relations. Shout out to the IRR. Make sure you support them and their work. Gabriel, of course, has done a tell-all expose type report into Black Lives Matter, and he lays out in great detail what exactly the Black Lives Matter organization is. So I'm going to have that conversation with him. Okay, hang on. Let's see here. I'm seeing some comments. The audio is really bad. Mic volume is way too high, BDL. All right, let's see if I can turn that down and if it makes a difference. All right, I've just turned it down, guys, so I'm hoping that helps and that it makes a bit of a difference. Sorry, I'm in a new location. It's been a bit of a challenge setting up my home studio. I'm here, again, way too high on your microphone. Okay, I've just seen that comment. Let me turn it down a bit more. All right, guys. From the point of Adrian Galley's comment about the mic being too high, you'll just let me know if it's much better now. So maybe as I quickly set up and the show and prime and to the lead up to my guest. As I said, my first guest tonight is analyst and researcher from the Institute of Race Relations. That's Gabriel Krause. I'm just going to quickly dial him on the line, on the separate line. Maybe whilst I'm doing that, how are you guys doing? I hope you guys are well. It's been a very eventful day. I spent today at the Jobs Save Lives protest, which was organized by the restaurant. You can hear that. So I'm just establishing my guest on the line. I've got him on standby. But as I was saying, today was actually quite an eventful day. So you'll have to excuse me for, again, if you've just joined the live stream, welcome to the Big Daddy Liberty show. And apologies again for starting the show so late. Things were a little hectic as we spent the day at the Jobs Save Lives protest here in Cape Town. I did a full day of shooting, including a bit of a confrontation with the South African Police Service as they came to shake things up. I will bring you that video tomorrow morning first thing. It is busy rendering and editing, so it should be up tomorrow morning. And you can see exactly what it is for South Africans to, as I've said in vlog 27, I think, to draw the line in the sand and to actually stand up against this government and its asinine lockdown regulation. So I brought you a whole bunch of street views and street talks with South Africans who stood up at this protest. And as I said, I took the fight, if I can call it that, directly to SAPS to say, tell me, how would you react, dear police officer, if if you were facing the prospect of not getting an income at the end of the month? So definitely, hopefully gave them something to think about in that regard. But let me not waffle away, except to say just a reminder to the viewers, if you like everything you see on the show, you can support the Big Daddy Liberty Show, and I'll give you those details midway in the show. My guest is waiting. I can see him in my other screen. Before I segue to my guest, can I just make sure from you guys that you can hear us clearly and everything is much better sound-wise? Let's see here. Let's see. Okay, looks like it looks... Z-Cat saying, nice ear rape sound. Really, dude? Okay, guys. It looks like everything is fine. So let me segue to my guest. Of course, as I said, I'm in conversation with Mr. Gabriel Krause, who is a researcher and analyst at the Institute of Race Relations. Let me just make sure that he's on my screen. Oh dear, I knew there'd be a slight problem. Gabriel, just give me a second here. I'm fixing you once again. Ah, there you go. Now you are properly in shot. Gabriel, good evening and welcome to the Big Daddy Liberty Show.
Thank you so much for having me, Sihle. Glad to be here.
Excellent, to it, brother. And you're now live on the show. Welcome to it. Gabriel, the title of the show is, revealed. What is Black Lives Matter? And, I say ... should you be supporting it? Of course, this comes in the wake of the sports fraternity in this country having been cajoled in one way or the other into pledging allegiance, if I can call it that, to Black Lives Matter. But you released a very interesting report, basically detailing what it is to, firstly, on the one hand, say and exclaim that you support Black lives or Black Lives Matter, and you argue there's a difference between saying that and saying you support the Black Lives Matter movement. So let's begin maybe at the top of this conversation. Dude, what is the Black Lives Matter organization?
So the Black Lives Matter organization was founded by three women, three Americans, Opal Tometi, Patrice Cullors, and Alicia Garza back in 2013. I was still in America at the time on the East Coast. They were on the West Coast. And there was this terrible killing at the end of 2012 of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman. And it was all over the press. It was sort of hard to think about. It seemed like Trayvon Martin was totally innocent and that George Zimmerman was just getting off because of racial bias or bad stand your ground laws or something like that. And these three activists were already trained. They had already sort of inculcated their social views. And they decided to try and make a movement out of this. And they kind of stumbled into the Black Lives Matter hashtag as being a really catchy thing. And they started to get organized and get events going. And it sort of bubbled, and it bubbled in the way that these things can go in terms of social movements without getting much traction until that flashpoint came. And that flashpoint was the killing of Michael Brown, the hands up, don't shoot case from Ferguson, which is an interesting case to talk about. But everyone assumed that he was unarmed, and everyone assumed that he was totally harmless and that he was crying out, hands up, don't shoot. And so the hashtag Black Lives Matter spread like wildfire across America, by some reports 27 million times in a short period. And off the back of that, they started getting official endorsements. They started getting donations. And they needed to sort of get their finances in order because it is starting to become a serious business. 2015, they become Time runner-up person of the year. They get press accolades all across America, the UK, the Anglosphere, generally speaking. So they go to 1000 Currents, which is an NGO finance consulting firm, and they get their HQ shifted from Los Angeles to Delaware because it's a tax haven, and they start accumulating serious money and influence and contacting world leaders, including Nicolas Maduro, but we'll get to that, president of Venezuela. And by 2019, their net assets are $3.4 million, about 70 million rand. That's after the salaries that have been paid. They've already set up scores of chapters across America, and they're starting to reach out across the world. They've rebranded themselves as the BLM Global Network. And then again, they hit a sort of a plateau until George Floyd is killed heinously in the eyes of everyone. And the spark is lit again. And this time, in just a few weeks, they raised $33 million. They pledged 12 million of it to projects, but so their net assets now are valued at about R500 million, and they are, they're social activists with a lot of money, a lot of clout. They've got access to every major American platform, sympathetic ears at the CNN, sympathetic microphones at CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, and so that's what it is. That's what the BLM Global Network is. It's got a footprint in the UK, in Europe, in America. It's trying to spread into Africa in a more organized way. It's explicitly Pan-Africanist. It sort of thinks that all black people's political interests are aligned around the world, whatever country they're in, and so it's trying to organize on that basis, and it's getting a lot of sympathy. And I think, in some sense, for good reason. You watch that video of George Floyd, and I think everyone who saw that thought, something is off here. Yeah. Something is seriously off. Yeah. And they've taken moments like that, and they've turned it into money and clout.
Gabriel, let me jump in here, because there's something I think instructive in your statement of they've taken moments like that. It's the idea, therefore, that it does seem as though Black Lives Matter acts in a way in which it almost exploits topical issues in order to push a particular narrative in a given moment. We'll get to the narrative and what you found to be firstly their ideological outlook and exactly what messaging they push. We'll get to that now. But as classical liberals, I want us to have this conversation first, just very briefly for maybe 2-3 minutes, around maybe what we agree on in terms of, at face value, the messaging we hear from them, which is absolutely, there is a massive issue in the United States, as is the case here in South Africa, with the issue of police brutality. Let's not pussyfoot around that. Of course, they attribute a racial element to it. That's separate to the point I think I want to make here, which is everybody maybe even watching the show should agree that, when the state becomes too big, when the state then starts resorting, and politicians in particular resort to wanting to acquire power and retain power at all costs, institutions of the state that are meant to protect our life, liberty, and property rights, including the police, can become a major threat to our life, liberty, and property right. Do you want to maybe just quickly chime in on that issue? And maybe that's, at least from my perspective, where I agree on the issue of police brutality.
Yeah, no, dude, I'm 100% with you. And this is it's weird because I've done half a dozen interviews today and last night from the report that we released, and no one quite puts it like that, like you just did. And I think it is the right way to put it. And from a personal point of view, for example, my fiance was born in the Soviet Union. Her whole family lived most of their lives in the Soviet Union, and they were terrified of their police, because the police there would come in the middle of the night and drag people out of their apartments and put them in a gulag for 10 years, no questions asked. And that's heinous. And the Stasi were heinous, and the Gestapo were heinous, and the apartheid police were heinous in their practices, in this detention without trial idea, And unfortunately, police abuse of power, that way of taking those institutions and those human beings who are sworn to serve and protect, and many of whom really want to do that. And turning, it's like I don't know, it's like turning the worm back against itself. It's a very ugly thing, and it continues to happen in this country. It does continue to happen in America at scale, and I'm fully with I'm with anyone who wants to draw attention to that and demand something better. And I just want to, if I can, like slot in here a personal story about Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
In 2017, just before the year I joined the Institute of Race Relations, before that, I tried to reach out to Black Lives Matter because I believed. I lived in America. I didn't think twice about it. They said the Black Lives Matter organization and movement is out to protect the vulnerable against predations of the state. And I thought, well, that's good. I'm with that. Now I came to South Africa. I was an art critic. I wasn't, I guess, paying enough attention to politics, to the real nitty-gritty of it. But then a day came, 27th of February, 2018, when our parliament passed a resolution for expropriation without compensation. And they didn't pass the law, but they passed a motion to amend the constitution to do that. And I thought, yes, this is very bad. This is going to hurt almost all South Africans outside of the political elite and their kleptocratic friends. This is going to hurt all South Africans. It's going to drive away investment. It's going to crush jobs. And you know what? In South Africa, most poor people are black. So the people who are going to get hurt the most, the people who are going to be in the front line of the disinvestment, of the joblessness, of the lawlessness that comes when you arbitrarily undermine that core principle of the rule of law, are going to be black people. So this is state abuse of power that I can see on its way. It's not popular to most South Africans. Most South Africans want jobs. They want free enterprise. They want reinforcement. They want protection of their property. They don't want their property to be up for grabs from the state. But here we are changing the laws as government to allow the state to decide who it gets to take from at what price, maybe at nothing. And I thought, this is crazy, and this is going to hurt black people's lives. And Black Lives Matter says that what it wants to do is save black people's lives from predation from the state. And so this must be an issue that is going to matter a lot to them. And I thought, 2018, they were at this slump that I was talking about. Like, they weren't such a hot movement at the time. Their critics were saying they just left us. They just care about narrow interests. They're not really connected to the facts on the ground. And I thought, this is going to be a great way to show that they really care. They can come into the South African public square where you've got this elite that's just dominating with a narrative that's far from the facts. And they can say, you know what? We might be Americans, but we can read the data. We can read the reports. We can read the analysis. We can speak to people on the ground. And we're finding that, as Americans might say, we want to call bullshit on this EWC thing as a way to save black people. This is going to damage black people very badly, and everyone, and all lives matter, but Black Lives Matter, and so we need to step in here and just let it be known that we don't stand for this. So I reached out, and I got nowhere. I reached out to friends who I was like, put me in touch, journalists, lawyers, young upstart politicians. Dude, a lot of them laughed at me. They were like, you clearly don't know what Black Lives Matter really is about. And it was only once I'd reached out, it's only once I'd tried to publish open letters, it's only once I'd been rejected at every door and had then gone in to read about their ideology that I realized, dude, unfortunately, there's this huge distinction between what people present as their values and the values that they actually commit themselves to in their actions. And BLM's values, what they say they value is not the same as what they really value. I don't see a lot of evidence of really valuing black people's lives. And the reason I'm bringing this up in connection to police brutality is that one of the starkest findings I had in my report was I read this paper by Professor Roland Fryer of Harvard University, the youngest black tenured professor there, MacArthur Genius Grant recipient, really serious economist. And he did a couple of studies, but the one that's the most disturbing is about when you combine a Black Lives Matter movement with an investigation into police brutality. That is like a Molotov cocktail being combined with matches. It just blows up violence. If you have an investigation into police brutality, he finds more often than not, you get salubrious outcomes, decrease in crime, increase in trust, police try and work harder. You incentivize people the right way. They're sworn to serve and protect. You can get them there. But if you just come in there with a viral movement where the whole country is saying the police are pigs, what's the Black Lives Matter chant? Pigs in blankets, fry like bacon. There's no such thing as a bad apple. The whole system is racist. You've got to defund them, disband them, get rid of them. What happens is the police draw into their bunkers and then criminals loot, pillage, steal, rob, and kill. Roland Fryer found hundreds of excess deaths after the combination of the BLM protests and the pattern and practice in investigations, and tens of thousands of excess felonies. And so, like, if you really care about Black lives and you see that, then you've got to think to yourself, maybe we need to change our model so that when we get investigations into the police, it doesn't make them withdraw from protecting the community. It makes them protect the community better. But I've seen no change like that. So I'm with you, dude. We need to be serious about reforming police where they're abusive, and especially in South Africa. But we need to look at the evidence and look at what works and what actually ends up causing more people to get killed.
Well, it must segue then our conversation to that point of the issue of the evidence. Number one, and this is a question to you, does Black Lives Matter actually believe in an evidence-based approach in dealing with the issue of police brutality, number one? And number two, does the evidence support the assertion, the implicit and even overt assertion by the likes of Black Lives Matter, the organization, that the biggest threat faced by, the black population in the United States is a racist white cop or a racist policing society, what they call the systemic racism that is inherent in the policing force? Does the evidence, Gabriel, match that claim?
Okay, I'll start with the first question. Do BLM care a lot about evidence? As far as I can tell, no. I think that if you're in the BLM global network, then one of the things that's easy about your life is you don't have to research. You don't have to fact find. Because here's part of the schema. If it's the case that there's a country or a state, a government, an institution within that state or government, a private enterprise, a business, anything that at one stage in the past was racist, then it's foundationally racist. That means automatically it's racist today. So you don't have to do more research to know if it's racist or not. You just have to know, was it once racist? Then it's still racist. Like a leopard can't change its spots kind of idea. So America was definitely once racist, like that's beyond question. So that means it's still racist. And American police were enforcing the laws of slavery. So that's racist on the basis of race. And so it's still racist. So that's a way of thinking about things that liberates you, I suppose, from needing to consult evidence. And another way is that if you think anytime something heinous happens to a black person, then that's racist, then you don't need to do sort of comparisons and counterfactuals and statistical analyses, because you just need to find one black person who's been harmed by the police unjustly, and then that shows that the whole police force is racist. So that's how some BLM global network organizers think in terms of the actual facts. Sorry, Sihle, go ahead.
I must interject there because I don't want the audience to lose a key point that you made. The argument you almost suggested, but you kind of glossed past it, is because they view the world, through their worldview at least, that the America is inherently racist, its very foundation, that because America's very foundation is racist, they would then segue and then argue from that position that anything and almost everything that happens to, say, a black individual or, quote, a minority, as they call them in the US, is based on that foundation of racism. Is that did I capture that properly?
Correct. And this comes straight out of critical race theory, which the BLM Global Network is basically like a public microphone for. Absolutely. Critical race theory started developing in academia got organized in 1989. You see some of the work of Derek Bell and the likes coming before that, but it really gets organized in 1989. And BLM Global Network is like the public face of that theory. And on that theory, America is foundationally racist. And that means that everything that happens in America must be viewed through the lens of race. But you can trace it even further back to W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a great intellectual, very smart guy in the 1880s through the 1920s. And he studied in Germany. He was a black American man after the end of slavery. He got into Harvard University, then went to Germany to study. And then he learned about the Volksgeist movement. And there the idea was that races matter and individuals matter insofar as they are members of races. And W.E.B. Du Bois imbibed that idea and wrote a book called The Color of Black Souls and did a series of lectures when he went back to America called Conserving Race. And his thought was, America is definitely racist. We've come out of this slavery era. There's a lot of problems that are still with us. The Ku Klux Klan is going wild, lynching people. So we've got problems. And some people like Booker T. Washington, truly great American intellectual black man who insisted on private enterprise as being the route forward. So some people are saying you must sort of get over the race issue and think of yourself as an individual, try and find a way to add value, try and find a way to find work, try and find a way to hold government accountable, hold police accountable when they're abusing their power. This is a pathway to failure. This is a pathway to doom, said Du Bois. The real pathway is to keep black and white mustn't come together as a series of individuals competing and collaborating under the rule of law. Black and white must stay separate. And what must happen is instead of black being below white, black must be separate to white, but equal in its own fresh and different way. And that's because blackness has a soul. He believed there's a soul that is distributed across all black people, a metaphysical connection. That's why I talk about soul politics. And so that idea lived on, kind of went out of fashion, kind of came back into fashion. Critical race theory sort of really elaborated it through Marxist and French deconstructivist ideas. And then the BLM Global Network has explicitly taken on those ideas and given them a public voice. So science and statistical analyses, that's not really, that's white mischief, if I can use an old phrase. That's white man's magic. Which brings according to them.
Which brings me then to what I think the person who may be listening now must understand in terms of the nature of the Black Lives Matter, the organization and the people behind it. The faces you have on the cover of your report are actually quite instructive. And ironically, I would argue that a lot of people who see those faces won't even know who those people are. Yet, you have these people who openly say, oh yes, I support Black Lives Matter and its stated goals. But who are the founders, Gabriel, of Black Lives Matter, and what is their ideological viewpoint? Because I think with you breaking that down, a lot of people who now watch will understand exactly what ideology drives the Black Lives Matter organization in particular.
Yeah, man. People, dude, I feel like it's quite disrespectful to support a movement and not know who its leaders are. Like if you say you support the EFF, but you don't know who Julius Malema is, like you're making a fool of yourself and of the EFF. Like get real. Figure out who the leaders are of the movement that you're throwing your weight behind. And I was making that mistake myself in 2017. So I know the temptation because it's so emotive, but you've got to be realistic and you've got to be respectful in a way to notice who these people are. So the first two, Alicia Garza and Patrisse Cullors, they describe themselves as trained Marxists.
That's right.
They are Marxist ideologues explicitly. They put that own label on themselves, and they have shown what they mean by it in terms of the policies that they promote through the Movement for Black Lives, which is an organization of which Black Lives Matter is a member, an officially endorsing member, and it endorses its policies. And its policy proposals are to curtail property rights, to cut military spending in half, defund or disband the police, to abolish all private schools, They say that the billionaires who are donating money to get private schools to grow and charter schools to grow are undermining blackness, are undermining the black community and the black soul, and are taking away the choice of the black community to just do its own thing. They want to abolish private hospitals. They want to abolish private dentists. They want to create black sacred sites, government mandated black sites of sacred worship where you worship blackness. Go to the Movement for Black Lives website. It's all there. I'm not making any of this up. Their idea is to create a state that is in command of everything in a discretionary way, so that and that literally taxes people according to their race and pays a universal basic income fund to black people with an extra rate, an extra rebate depending on how black they are.
That's crazy.
And it's dude, I mean, it's funny until it becomes a reality.
Dude.
And these, anyway, so, but I encourage people to read the report and look this stuff up. I'm not making this up. They made it up. And if you think that this is just like pie in the sky, like, like naive, like activists, maybe they're older now, but they still have a student mentality where they're not really connected to reality. The third Black Lives Matter co-founder is Opal Tometi, and she has met with Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela.
Yeah, boy.
And she said, I'm so glad that there's a world leader out there who is finally protecting the vulnerable and protecting black lives. I'm so glad that there's a country that has finally realized democracy and peace and freedom. The Bolivarian Revolution is fantastic. The Bolivarian Revolution is this 21st century socialism model that Venezuela has used to turn itself from being the richest country in the continent to being the poorest country in the continent.
And I'm sorry, that's where they lose me to a very large extent. I mean, they lose me before that, but that's one in particular. Anybody who watches the show, and I can really see the comment section echoing it of never trust a commie, is, once you say that your stated training, if you will, as the founders of BLM state, is Marxist in nature, you're a commie, essentially, you lose me. Because immediately I know that you are in my case, you're anti-faith. In my case, you're anti-flag or anti-love of country as being one place, a non-racial society for all, to be equal before the law. I know you are anti-family in particular, which, by the way, Black Lives Matter have been able to have openly stated. That
explicitly, yeah. The family unit is the enemy. They say this is one of the things that we have to bring down in the 21st century.
Crazy, absolutely crazy. And of course, the last one, you're anti-freedom. No communist really worth his salt would come on my show, for example, and say, oh, I actually stand for individual freedoms and whatever the case. Why? You said it yourself, Gabriel, that they state in their own documents that they want a state that essentially controls all aspects of people's lives. Gabriel, we've got 5-10 minutes left before I go to my other guests, Mpiyakhe Dhlamini and Dumo Denga, who are waiting patiently. I want us to get to the nub of this conversation, which is, therefore, when you have these celebrities and, these who's who, and right now the sports people, going on one knee and raising a fist and saying, we pledge support and allegiance to Black Lives Matter. Ironically, some of these individuals, if we're having a different context or a different conversation in a different context, would say they support my values, for example, of faith, flag, family, and freedom. What's the disconnect here, Gabriel? What are they not seeing, and why is BLM so successful in hiding its nature and selling this lie to the public?
Okay, so there's two things they're not seeing. The one thing that they're not seeing is the solution that Black Lives Matter is posing to the problem. So we agree that there's this problem of police brutality. And we didn't get into the stats. We'll talk about it another day. The stats on police brutality in terms of race in America are very surprising. It turns out there's no evidence of racial discrimination for officer-involved shooting or for contact. There's some evidence in many departments of non-lethal force, hands, handcuffs, stuff like that. So Looks like there is a problem to address, maybe. Looks like it's definitely not the problem that they're looking for. But when you see anyone being killed by the police who's unarmed and who's not posing a threat to society, that is a problem. So police brutality is definitely a problem. They take that problem and then they get you so wrapped up in the emotional history of slavery, of people being taken across the Atlantic Ocean, of Jim Crow, of the red-lined areas where black people couldn't get loans on homes. They take you through this long and arduous history. And by the time you get through that, you're so exhausted and so furious that you just don't think about the solution they're offering. They are the solution they're offering. And it's when you get into that place where you're not thinking about practical solutions, you're just thinking about an identity, then they've got you in the magic bag, whether it's communists or fascists or anyone or musicians. I mean, it's a nice place to go if afterwards you just go home. But if afterwards you've given your power and your credibility and your endorsement and your money to an organization that does have practical solutions in mind, but you didn't consult those, then you have basically ransomed your own agency to another agent. And so that's part of the problem. The other part of the problem, I think, is that South Africans don't realize, in a sense, how relatively powerless we are, especially in the global media space. Like, part of my mission in 2017, I was trying to steer the boats. I was trying to be a tugboat to the American and global Black Lives Matter movement, saying, guys, come, let me help you find a new cause that you can celebrate. South Africans who are going to be immiserated by expropriation without compensation as a way to distract from the corruption of the Zuma era and the failure to replace that with something better under Ramaphosa. And I got nowhere. I didn't get nowhere because I didn't have connections. I had connections with the top editors at the top publications in America. And I still got nowhere. I had direct access to some Black Lives Matter leaders, and I still got nowhere. If you're a South African sports star and you think you can overwhelm, you can re-steer the American Black Lives Matter movement, then I don't think you've begun to think about what R500 million means, what it means to be able to raise R500 million in 2 weeks, what it means to have CNN and the New York Times on your side compared to whatever kind of publication you think you have on your side in South Africa. So I think some people join it completely in ignorance of the solutions that they offer. They feel that there's a problem and they want to do something about it, so they give it to them. They don't think about the solutions. And other people join, then they realize that the solutions are not great, but they say, no, we still want to stick with it because we want to change it from the inside. There's no voting structure in Black Lives Matter in the BLM global network. There's no equality. In fact, one guy, a black American, Robert Ray Barnes, he tried to start the Black Lives Matter Foundation. I think at last year, and he had a completely different solution. He said, rather than antagonize the police and drive wedges between the men and women in blue and black Americans, let's try and get trust. Let's try and get unity. Let's try and learn from our mistakes. Let's try and have some serious accountability. Let's try and have serious investigations that make things better, not worse. Dude, that guy has been slandered. He didn't raise much money, but when he started to manage to get a little bit of traction, he was slandered in every major American publication that I can find as being fake BLM, as being unaffiliated with the BLM movement, because he stands for unity between the police and the public, whereas they stand for disband the police, defund the police. So if, as an American, you can't change it, how is a South African going to change what the BLM movement means? I think you should go for something else, like something that's not tainted from the start, something that starts with, yes, we agree on that problem, but we have a fresh idea on how to get solutions that are going to make a real difference to people's lives, which do matter.
But as a final two questions, Gabriel, because I think you've shaped the conversation in that direction. Talk to me then about someone like me who stands up and says, you know what, actually, what we really want is to build a unified, cohesive society where people get along. Not because there's no differences amongst us, of course there's differences amongst us, but rather a society where we have a fair way of arbitrating our disputes. And because of that fair system, if you will, we're able to engage each other with mutual respect, etc., etc. And beyond that, to codify that entire thing, the idea that actually I don't look at you on the and judge you on the basis of your skin color. I look at you and judge you on the basis of your character. What Martin Luther King so aptly described, judging people by the content of their character. In other words, Gabriel, the idea of a non-racial society. I want you to juxtapose these two, I'll call it ideas. One which I stand for, the idea of building a non-racial society, versus what the likes of your BLM, Black Lives Matter, are building, which is effectively a black supremacist movement. The idea of creating special categories for blacks, that are seen as being of an elevated status than everybody else. Because that's effectively what they're asking for in real terms. If we just cut the nonsense for a moment and look at exactly what they're asking for. And as a final point before I put it to you, you find that a lot of individuals on the left who have absorbed these critical race theory and really racialized perspectives on all things, racialized worldview on how they view all things in society, they tend to be the sort of people who, ironically, the likes of your Jim Crow politicians in the past, the likes of your apartheid politicians would agree with these guys today and say, yes, absolutely, you must create special categories for blacks. There must be a special water fountain for blacks. What do you think we were trying to do back in apartheid? So they would agree, ironically, with today's leftists who argue that there must be safe spaces for people of color and blah, blah, blah. So juxtapose those two visions for me, please. The non-racial one and the supremacist, the racial, the ethno-nationalism, if I can call it that, and the race supremacism that we're seeing from the likes of Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, so this goes all the way back to W.E.B. Du Bois versus Booker T. Washington, all the way forward to today. When you find that there's a society where there are salient cleavages divided along race or any social identity, and especially where you find that those cleavages are leaving asymmetries of injustice, then there's two broad approaches to solving it. And the one approach is to say, one race is up here in terms of its status, another race is down here in terms of its status. We need to get the status of the race that is below to increase, either to equal but separate or above in its own special way. And individuals will rise in their own status, derivative of the status of the race. So people must judge each other by race, but they must change the judgment. So it starts with status of the race itself being a thing that matters, that must matter more than it's currently mattering, and must matter to a different relative standing. Then it goes to, how do you do that? Reputation pooling. You must say, if this happened to a black person, it can happen to me, even if I'm on the opposite end of the world in a completely different environment. If a black person does something great, then I can also do something great. And I think this is a very unfortunate thing that's starting to creep into South African sports, is this thought that like our national sports team is not performing for the nation. It's one guy is performing for people who look like him, another guy is performing for people who look like him. This reputation pooling thing is very important, and America has done a very good job of growing that idea. And then the third thing is you need a code of conduct that is derivative of your race. So a black person must act in this way, and a white person must act in that way. A white person must kneel and say sorry and lash themselves on the back, and a black person must, sing and dance and litanize the history of oppression. And people will get higher or lower statuses according to how well they act according to their racial code of conduct. And the hope there is from these ethno-nationalists or race nationalists is that if you can get the right status for the race and the right code of conduct for the race and the right way of people having their individual identities be dependent on the race, then everything will work together and it'll be a better life for all. There are some problems with this from a human values point of view, from a faith point of view, from a secular idea of what the origins of human worth is. There's these philosophical and really deep-seated problems that I have with that in my gut and in my brain. How's it, Seated? I just heard a funny noise. Am I still with you?
I hope you're still with me. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
So there's a fundamentally funny idea with this, yeah?
So it's philosophically, I think it's dead wrong, and it definitely goes against all major religions. But on a practical level, it's also completely proven itself every time that it's tried to fail. Either corruption sets in because people are so worried about guarding the status of the race that they forget about accountability. So they're like, you can't criticize someone from our race group because that'll bring the whole status of the race down. So even if he's lying, corrupt, abusive, murderous, rapacious, whatever it is, rather just don't say it out loud. Because that's going to bring the status of the race down. So either race nationalist groups fall down on corruption, or they become military adventurists and they unleash the force of hatred that is at the deep core of their ideology, and then they get crushed from the outside. So I mean, I think one of the worst. I think a great lesson that South Africans need to remember is one of the worst things you can have is a race nationalist of your own race trying to represent you, because it's embarrassing from the start, but if they actually take charge, they're going to probably make your life worse unless for a time you become more of a parrot race nationalist like them. And even still, your days are numbered. It's much better to go for, I think, the option that is both morally and practically superior, which is to judge people by the content of their character, to collaborate, to find compassionate, humane, and productive solutions to real-world problems. It just is as simple as those two different choices. And if you take that second choice, there is no challenge that matters that is too great for the human being to overcome it.
That's right. No, I fully agree. Man, Gabriel, we've come to the end of our conversation, man. Two last quick questions. How do the folks find you, and how do they find that report? Because I think anybody who's watching this feed must read that report that you put together. How do we find that?
Great. Yeah, I'd love that. Follow my work on the Daily Friend, and you can see the report. Ivo Factor wrote a nice sort of summary of it, bringing it directly to an issue in South African sports yesterday. You can look it up. There's a link to it there, or go to irr.org.za, and it's our latest report. It's the first one that you'll see there, because Black Lives Matter, what South Africans need to know about the BLM Global Network. Absolutely. Gabriel Krauser from the Institute of Race Relations. Of course, he's a writer and analyst in that part of the world. Gabriel, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Caesar. Thank you very much for having me, Big Daddy. Thanks, brother. And yeah, that's the chat with G, man. Again, emphasizing a lot of the points that I make on the show here to say, it's you get to choose, right? You get to choose what you want to stand for. Do you stand for what's happening right now in our society, where people go back to their little hookies, their little racial hookies, and we spew invective, we shout at each other from these hookies, fearful of talking and engaging each other? Or do you actually say, no, I'm not my skin color, I'm not my gender, I'm a human. I nearly swore. I'm a human. I'm an individual. I have volitions, thoughts that are unique to me. And if anything, if there is one thing that ties me to my fellow man, is exactly that. The fact that we're both human beings with a God-given right to life, liberty, and property rights. And our culture, if anything, our families say more about who we are than these arbitrary racial and gender categories that are created often by these trendy lefties that I like to talk about. Because, again, when I say these trendy lefties, it's mostly individuals who are on the left, who are yoked, deeply invested and deeply yoked in these ideas of perpetuating differences in race, differences in gender, and arguing that there should be hierarchies in society where you treat someone differently based on their race or based on their gender, where one, they'll argue, is an oppressor based on their race or based on their gender, and the other is a victim, an eternal victim, a perpetual victim, based again on their race and their gender. These are classically Marxist ways of viewing the world. Classically Marxist. Where, if you remember, Karl Marx himself in Das Kapital argued that there is the defining divide in society, he argued, was that there is a bourgeoisie, those who are at the top of the class structure, because he used class analysis, and the ones who were at the bottom were the poor, the working class, the proletariat. So that is the divide, he argued. But today's Marxists, the likes of whom include Black Lives Matter, by the way, now take not only class, but they add gender and they add race in particular, and they mobilize around race.
They're mobilized around race. So that you, dear viewer, need to be conscious and awake to the nonsense that they're spewing your way. So that if your children are being force-fed this junk at school, you, the parent, must be able to stand up and say, not in my name, not in this household. We do not advance racially supremacist or ethno-nationalist ideology in this household. And if anything, I will march into that school and tell the people who are teaching our children, hey, hands off my kids with this nonsense. Because I'm telling you now, as I always say on this show, and I'm feeling myself get angry, I always say you are in a battle of ideas. You are in a battle of ideas, whether you're witting or unwitting to that. And it is in that battle of ideas that where you have the responsibility of advancing your values to those who you care about and defending your values in the structures, in the institutions in which we engage with on a day-to-day basis, whether it's the workplace, the school, or whatever the case may be. That is your responsibility. Because I'm in that fight. I have recognized my role and what I want to play as my role in this battle of ideas that I talk about. And I'm playing my part. Pushing out the ideas of liberty in our communities. Pushing out the ideas of my mission to want to build a prosperous, property-earning, non-racial and free society. Pushing out the idea that as I do this, the values, the foundations that I work off of is my love of faith, flag, family, and freedom. Guys, we're in this fight. Stand with BDL. Hashtag stand with BDL. As I push these ideas into society and I feed, if you will, the likes of Abu Gabriel Krauser and my next guest now, who are my allies, if I can call it that, in pushing these values, these ideas into society. Hey man, y'all aren't hearing me. I can see you tonight. This is going to be a lit show. Speaking about it being lit, we're in the final half an hour of the show. I want to bring in my two guests, Mpiyakhe Dhlamini from the Free Market Foundation, and of course, Dumo Denga, the host of the Manpatria Show. I want us to chat about this. Let's provide some context. Let's provide some analysis. I know these guys will have some very interesting views. Just give me a moment, guys, as I set that up. I'm going to bring them onto the feed right now. Bring yours. All right. Again, I'm watching the comments, guys. Please keep the comments coming. Let's bring the questions in now, especially as I have these guests, because I'm going to put your questions to them. All right. Just pardon the noise, guys. The Skype jingle. It'll just be a moment of it as I establish my connection with these lads. All right, I think I have established connection with the lads. They're on standby at the moment. I'm going to bring them on screen now. Fellas, welcome to the Big Daddy Liberty Show. I hope you had an opportunity to watch my previous guest, Gabriel Krauser. Can I just alert the both of you that there's some sort of background noise for one of you. I'm not sure who. If you can just keep an eye on that. But yeah, there is a loud humming noise with one of you guys. Maybe if you can just mute your mics in the meantime and try and figure that out, fellas, I'd appreciate it. But nonetheless, you are on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Welcome to it. Dumo, I want to begin with you, brother, because again, I've just wrapped up the conversation with Gabriel Krauser, and I'm hoping you got an opportunity to watch it, guys. He made some salient points, and he's released this report into Black Lives Matter, debunking a lot of myths. Firstly, making the distinctions between some people who are out of naiveness will maybe say, you know what, yes, of course Black Lives Matter, right? There's that naive individual who rightly says something like that because, they look at it at face value, but they don't really know the organization Black Lives Matter and the ideology behind it, Dumo.
Yes, you actually that is actually a spot on overview and summary, and I think the report that Gabriel released was also very good as well. Yes, a lot of people obviously are supporting Black Lives Matter because, of course, I mean, as you said, they believe that Black Lives Matter. But the problem is that they haven't really done the research into the organization, what they stand for, or what they say they stand for, and what they really stand for. And, many people don't do that type of research on them because, hey, I mean, they got other things to do. And, I mean, that's why you saw people putting black squares showing support, not realizing really the context of what is actually going on. So, yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what you said.
Mpiyakhe, I must come to you because when I asked you to join the show, I raised the idea that what I wanted us to really unpack in this issue, especially as Black South Africans, because all three of us are Black South Africans, whether you want to choose to self-identify or rather whether you're self-identifying as Black holds any intrinsic meaning or not, people will call us Black South Africans. So with that being said, Mpiyakhe, speak to me about the dangers, therefore, of this resurgence of race nationalism that we're seeing. We see it a lot on social media. We hear it a lot in our politics. The ANC itself will often say, politicians, when you catch them off guard, yes, ever since the black government, they'll say, was voted in, blah, 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 blah. And of course, it carries through into policy, doesn't it? Where there are policies in this country which are overtly racialized. Black economic empowerment, affirmative action, choosing or rather picking winners and losers in society using race. Do you want to comment on the dangers of this sort of approach?
Yeah, I think to South Africans, it should be clear what the dangers of this approach are. I mean, you would think after we've gone through apartheid and we've gone through some of the racial legislation of the past, that South Africans would be aware by now of what can happen if you go down this path, but it doesn't seem to be the case. I mean, an excellent article that I think people should read is by James Mayberg, where he sort of tries to catalog some of the ways that racialism has crept back into policy in South Africa in numerous ways, through legislation, regulation, and so on, mainly through the principle of representativity. And so if you look at those things, I think in a way we are more advanced than America along the racial nationalist past. And I say that deliberately, with tongue in cheek. We are more advanced in America in that sense, in that we have gone further than them. We have actually done some of these bad ideas. Like we have actually implemented the racial representativity in the public service. We have we have the Employment Equity Act, which obliges private businesses to basically comply with racial targets and sort of have a plan to meet those targets. So we have all of those things, and America doesn't have that yet. And so so this is the danger. And I think South Africans, in supporting Black Lives Matter, must understand that it's not only about the sentiment contained in the statement Black Lives Matter. That's like saying black people are human. I mean, like it's essentially it's something that no one can disagree with, and I think that explains a lot of what's happening. People, because you can't disagree with the statement, so people just say, okay, what's the harm? I can just take a knee, and it's a true statement. So what's wrong with it? So I see that, but at the same time, you need to understand. Before you get dragged, I think it's almost the first step. You agree with the sentiment, and then they take you to the next step because they seem to have all the solutions. And obviously, a lot of people haven't thought about these issues, so it's easy to fall into what they believe, and then you end up into the racial nationalist path that South Africa is on.
And yes, Dumo, I was saying this to Gabriel earlier on. It almost feels as if we've genuinely come full circle, where you have our let's call it past freedom fighters, for lack of another word, I couldn't think of anything else, who fought for originally non-racial ideas, right? Because in their lived reality, they used to see signs, for example, saying, this bench is for whites only, this bench is for blacks only, this entrance is for, blacks only, blah, blah, blah. You go down the line in that regard, whether it was in the 60s, America, Jim Crow in the South, or here during apartheid. You then had a reaction to that from these individuals who we can maybe broadly call non-racialists, to say, actually, you should not be judging people by the skin color. It's morally repugnant to base our policies in society on delineating between the different races. However, Dumo, it does seem, and I wanted to chime in here, that we're seeing a reversion to that, almost a legitimizing the idea that actually, yes, you can view people based on race, and that it's legitimate to even have hierarchies to an extent of these racial groupings, where on the one side, we view certain people as being inherently victims, and you'll hear things like, oh, it's on the basis of there being systemic racism, as they'll say, and I want us to talk about that. And on the other, they'll say something like, oh, but you're an oppressor by nature. I mean, look at what we call, what the ANC and most leftists call white people in this country. Oh, they're inherently racist, or they're settlers, they'll say. Talk to me about this, Dumo. Are we not coming full circle on this issue?
Yeah, I would agree with what you're saying there. I think that the main problem is that a lot of these race hustlers will actually try and use, the basic tenets of human behavior, such as tribalism. And some would say tribalism is the reason why we actually survived through millions of years of evolution and stuff like that. And they've exploited that to try and push a narrative. And this is a very dangerous thing because, I mean, when you exploit the basic nature of human beings to try and push a narrative, you can actually create very, very, very dangerous situations. I mean, look, the reality is this. I mean, Thomas Sowell wrote on this many times, especially in the Balkans, what happened in Armenia, what happened in Rwanda, I mean, and in Sri Lanka. All of those situations came as a result of identity politics and pushing this racism, like pushing one race over the other or trying to uplift another race and give them some sort of status and stuff like that. So, yeah, you're right. We are coming full circle. And South Africa must be careful because if they're not careful, they could actually experience the situations that we experience in those countries that I mentioned now. And people mustn't think that we're too good to experience them because we are human beings and there are people trying to take advantage of the situation.
And I must say this, guys, before I go to the questions. And if you are watching the Big Daddy Liberty Show, welcome to it, guys. Get those questions in. I've got my two guests with me. I know he said in studio, but I've got my two guests with me. Dumo Denga, the host of the Manpatria Show. Please check that out. And, of course, Mpiyakhe Dhlamini from the Free Market Foundation at Turing_1991 on Twitter. Guys, Mpiyakhe, I was coming back to you on this particular issue because I think I want us to quickly chew on this issue again of the dangers, therefore, of someone who then becomes immersed in the racialized way of looking at things, therefore accepting, Uguti, even at the level of policy, state policy towards how we address development issues in a society, that it's legitimate, they'll say, for us to pick winners and losers based on race. Let me go very quickly as a good example of how even as South Africans we're beaten and we're fatigued by race. Look at how politicians, when Mpiyakhe talk to and about us, look at how, for example, if you're a black South African who doesn't buy into the narrative of the likes of your ANC, EFF, etc. You are a, quote, clever black. I've been called a kafir openly by some of these individuals. They'll call me a house nigger, for instance. A coon, a coconut, the idea of being brown on the outside, white on the inside. Oreo, same principle. Bootlicker, you got on the line. A white South African, oh, how dare you speak up? Don't you know, they'll say, that your past, your history, is one of racial oppression. You're a 1652. They'll say, all these boring things. Julius Malema calling Indians inherently racist and that they hate black South Africans. Or Jimmy Manye, who's now rebranded himself as Umzwanele Manye, basically having at one stage argued that, all these colored people, why do they live in the Western Cape? There is a, quote, over-concentration of colored people in the Western Cape, close quote. Mpiyakhe, are we not fatigued? And are we not, what's the word? Talk to me about the mental fatigue, perhaps, that we endure as South Africans at a political elite who talks about us and to us in this way, and we don't even bat an eyelid about this anymore.
Well, I think it's the root problem is that a lot of people, I would guess most people are not aware of the source of the ideas they believe in. People just take things for granted. I mean, I used to be like this myself. There were a lot of ideas that were in my head that I was not aware that they'd actually been planted, whether through school or through television. And so you have to be, ideally, everyone would be rigorous in that way and actually look at everything they believe in and say, okay, is this actually, what's the justification behind this? And I think the solution or the antidote to the kind of ideological infiltration using a sentiment we can all get behind from people like Alicia Gaza and so on. The solution to that, the antidote to that, is just to basically be respond with your own reason, with your be critical, formulate your own solutions. We cannot all agree that police brutality is a serious problem. Then think about proper solutions about how to solve the problem. Don't outsource your thinking to someone else. Don't allow someone else to tell you this is the solution. Think about it for your own self and decide if it makes sense. And I think this is the problem that we are currently suffering under in South Africa. People take things for granted. Let me give you an example. BE is a great example. BE was strongly opposed when it first came into being in South Africa, 2003, roundabout there. But now it's almost like the uniformity is scary. Everyone basically just takes it as given. And so yeah, you need BA to make sure that black people are okay, even though black people are not improving in terms of their standard of living. Right. But people still stick to it. And so this is what the battle of ideas is about. It's just basically figuring out the source of these ideas and doing the hard work as an individual. You have no excuse, and you otherwise, because whatever consequence comes will be borne by you. So no one else can save you. So you have to take responsibility for yourself and sort of think for yourself and not allow these people to implant ideas. Whether it's your lecture at university, never allow anyone to tell you that you can't question. You must always question. Absolutely. And so that's what I would say. So for South Africa and the sportsmen and supporting PLM, I would say to them, I do not disagree with their sentiment, but the sentiment must not be an automatic endorsement of everything that Alicia Gaza and her two co-founders are believing. So it must be a sentiment that is backed up by independent thought from the individuals involved. So that's the basis we must engage on, because we must understand that all of these people are well-meaning individuals, most of them anyway.
And Dumo, Mpiyakhe makes a good point that you've got to separate between those who are just ignorant and are well-meaning, and those who are nefariously using this issue to obscure reality, or rather the reality of what they really stand for. And maybe as you're saying that, I wanted to deal with a question from Alwyn de Bruin, Dumo. He says, doesn't it feel to you like they are using our country as a testing ground for their methodology of ideological indoctrination? Dumo?
Well, that's a very good question. I would say, I don't have the facts with me, but I won't lie, it does feel like that, because, again, if you look at the whole BLM organization, if you look at the economic policies, they're pushing for a lot of Marxist left-wing policies. They want to end private property and so forth. And now if you look at the ANC, for example, what they have actually done, they've actually put in a motion to change the constitution to allow for expropriation of land without compensation. So, and also Black Lives Matter has this idea that, especially with land, in one of their policy documents, that the government must have this thing of fair development. And basically, this just gives like some sort of favorable discrimination towards minorities, or when I say minorities, I'm talking about American minorities and indigenous people of the United States. It gives them an extra advantage, which is very similar to this whole idea, and which is very similar to expropriation of land without compensation, where the state has to like really get involved in the economy. And we know what happens when the state gets involved in the economy. Destruction follows afterwards.
Absolutely. Fellas, we're in the last 6 minutes of our chat. I'm sorry, this is a particularly short one. I just wanted you guys to come on to give some analysis from what we heard from Gabriel. But maybe in the last 6 minutes, I want to come back to you, and maybe even just the both of you guys. Guys, talk to me then about the pressure that is being mounted on perhaps Black South Africans right now, because I think there are sports stars. I think a lot of our sports stars are also just responding to pressure that is being put on them. The almost implicit idea that if you have a darker hue of skin, you must automatically support Black Lives Matter. Talk to me about that pressure of this almost resurgence of groupthink to an extent, which Mpiyakhe rightly said we need to resist by actually thinking independently. But talk to me about some of your experiences, Dumo, that maybe you've gone through. What do you experience, and what are some of the things that are said to you? And I'm going somewhere with this question, guys.
Yes.
Dumo? Your experiences, the sort of pressure that's been laid on you to support all things black and quote blackness.
Yes, I've had a few, especially on Facebook, where I actually showed the police brutality stats, and then an individual got so angry with me and said that, and started making false accusations, started saying that, no, you're saying that we need to submit to the oppressor or take on the morality of the oppressor because you are denying the lived experiences of black people and so forth. And this is a problem that I've noticed, is that when you try to show an error with a particular movement, because Black Lives Matter has managed to conflate that statement of Black Lives Matter with the movement itself and the policies that they support, when you criticize any of their policies, people think you're criticizing that actual statement, and then they think that you're actually pushing for racism against black people. And I had a very difficult time actually trying to convince people otherwise. But yeah, it was not a good experience, and many people think that I'm racist, which I'm not. And you know, it's ridiculous.
Mpiyakhe, pum pum pum, facts don't matter, pum pum pum, facts don't matter. Is that the rallying cry of Black Lives Matter? And they're like, say, are the facts racist?
Sorry, I couldn't hear the last part.
I was saying, are the facts racist?
Well, I don't think facts are racist. Facts are just descriptions of reality. So your facts can never be racist. They are what they are. But I think Dumo is absolutely right. And I think it was a black guy at Harvard who actually came out with the research showing that police brutality is a problem in the USA, but it's not specifically directed at black people. Right. Because if you look at the incidence of crime, and that's another thing that you actually have to consider, because if you look at the incidence of crime, the police are basically equally brutal to all Americans, just based on the incident of crime. And the bigger issue here, which is not often talked about, are things like the war on drugs, which has basically criminalized a whole lot of black people, and the war on drugs was supported by people like the Congressional Black Caucus, for example, in the USA, when Bill Clinton was president. It was the so-called war on crime, and now it has led to this situation that we're in, where a lot of black people have to go to prison for selling drugs and so on. And so this is the underlying issue that causes some of these things to bubble up, where you see this police brutality seeming to be at a higher rate among black people. But when you actually look at the stats, it's not. It's just the incidence of the crime, which is not really a crime, but it was made a crime through the support of people who now say they support Black Lives Matter. So it's a whole mess.
Absolutely. And guys, maybe as a final thought, I must segue in this direction, because I think when you listen to the likes of Black Lives Matter and really any of these other, trendy lefty groupings that like to view things through the prism of race and through that extra prism of saying there's a victim and an oppressor in all relations in society, the one thing we never hear is a strong message. In fact, in this country, I want to phrase it this way. We've had 26 years in this country of a conversation about rights and what is due to me and entitlements, but very little in the way of a conversation around responsibilities, individual responsibility at that, and what I need to do to advance and protect my life, liberty, and property. Am I being fair in saying, whether we're looking at it from the context of South Africa or in the United States, that we need to encourage a bigger and better culture, a larger culture, if you will, of individuals actually taking responsibilities and us devolving power back into the level of the family, where that is where you're socialized, that is where we're taught the values, if you will, and we stop this idea of exporting these ideas to government and the political elite. What would your response be to that, Dumo?
I would happily accept that, in my opinion, because once you bring power to the people, people can actually think of their own solutions and actually collaborate with others. And you find that in those situations, the better solutions are actually brought up. In fact, I mean, even during apartheid, and this is not to justify apartheid, but I mean, even in the Eastern Cape, there were schools that were built without any government assistance. It was because communities and individuals came together and said, hey, let's do this, let's build a school. So it just shows that, when people actually have an idea and put their minds together, they can actually build something good. So, I mean, if people are building schools in apartheid under racism and everything like that, without any government assistance, just imagine what could happen when you allow them to do that in a free society.
Mpiyakhe, should we be aiming for the free society to most speak, so one that devolves power to the individual and really responsibilities also to the individual?
I would agree with that. I think individual responsibility is the missing piece in the South African puzzle, because we are a victim to all of these ideas, because people have outsourced their thinking, they've outsourced everything. I mean, just to give you an example, one of my favorite peoples in South Africa, the Bafokeng, and to me, they sort of embody this idea of individual responsibility. If you look, before even platinum was discovered on their land, between 1834 to 1891, they started buying back their own land in order to be able to control it and own it. And this decision to do this, the king who decided to do this was Kgosi August Mokgatle. And the decision to do this allowed them to later claim their royalties from the mining that happens on their land. And now that's what I call vision and taking responsibility for yourself, for your own community. And so this is what's missing in South Africa. In as much as government, yes, has bad policies, it does a lot of bad things, what do we as South Africans, what is our responsibility? Because we have a constitution, we have the right to vote, we can implement the right incentives to make politicians do what we need them to do. But in terms of society as itself, just looking outside of government, like just consider, for example, this story with alcohol and that it causes so much problems. No, it's not alcohol that causes the problem. It's individuals choosing irresponsible behavior because society somehow has broken down and the individuals feel they no longer have to comply with being peaceful, being courteous, and so on. And so these are things that government can never fix. These are things that we have to fix as individuals working together on a voluntary basis. And so these are the serious problems, and things like drugs and guns and so on are just symptoms of the problem. And so this is what we need to do in South Africa: start with individual responsibility, take ownership of our own actions. I'll give you another example. I think I shared this story on Twitter. There was a guy who I was buying cigarettes recently. don't ask me how, but this guy was standing outside a shop which was owned by a Pakistani gentleman. And then his cigarettes cost more, were about 10 rands more for a pack. And I asked him, why would you sell cigarettes in front of this guy's store and you're charging more? And he was like, yeah, I'm Zulu and this guy is Pakistani. So yeah, basically was saying to me that you must buy from me because I'm Zulu. You must spend extra. You must spend an extra 10 rands because I'm Zulu. And so you have to understand, you must make yourself poorer because it benefits a fellow Zulu. So that's the kind of thinking we need to get rid of, and people take responsibility and ownership.
Man. Guys, no, I must wrap up, and I must share a story as I wrap up. One which disturbs me, but also speaks to the climate of what I was basically arguing. Has become an unfortunate status quo. I was actually supposed to have Ubuntu Depena on this broadcast, but I had to respectfully, agree that, I got trapped by my own sentence construction. Let me rephrase that. But I had to agree, rather, for him to step back because, ever since Botha spoke out and expressed his view, rightly, by the way, a view which is absolutely correct, which is to say that we need to be careful of organizations like Black Lives Matter, given their black supremacist undertones in particular. Botha's now facing all sorts of accusations against him, of him being quote unquote racist, simply because he's white and he expressed a different view. And there's even an attempt at cancel culture around Uputa Dipena, people threatening his income and the like. And, I must just say this on the show, Buta, I'm really sorry I didn't get back to you on that request you asked for. My day became a bit busy, but dude, you have my full support in this issue, including fighting these individuals who attempt, to quote unquote cancel us for expressing our free views and thoughts. By all means, disagree with what Buta may have said, if you disagree, but don't threaten people's livelihoods and that like that. I find that morally abhorrent. And this whole cancel culture in particular. So I thought I must just shout him out on the show. And guys, please show Buta support on his social media to say that we're standing firmly with him. Fellas, let me say thank you to both of you. Maybe as a final question, fellas. Let me put it to you directly. Mpiyakhe, I'll start with you. So should I expect you to take a knee soon and raise a fist and pledge allegiance to Black Lives Matter? Do you support Black Lives Matter, Mpiyakhe?
Well, I agree that's Black Lives Matter. That's about it. I don't support the organization, and I will not be taking any time soon. And just because, I think, anyway, by the way, just as an aside, I think, protests like that, I don't know what they really achieve or what their point is. But anyway, I've never really done anything like that. I do believe that the real battle is always the battle of ideas, and that everything else is basically almost a sideshow. So I would say that I doubt I will ever take any for anything or anyone, but I don't see why I should support this bunch of Marxists when there are so many rational ways to support the cause of ending police brutality. For example, the Libertarian Party in the USA has focused a lot on this issue of police brutality, basically raised it, and they've been fairly radical about it as well. There are many more rational organizations to support.
Absolutely, fully agreed. Dumo, I'm going to put it to you, obviously.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention one person, Eric July, which is someone that you should have on your show, essentially. But he's a great one on this issue, on understanding the issue. He's an African American anarchist, and he really understands this issue well.
Absolutely. I mean, he's someone who I really hope I can get on the show. In fact, I'll pop his at and ask him to come on to the show. In fact, it'd be very nice to have a chat with Eric July. Okay, thanks a lot, Dumo. Let me put it to you. I'm gonna put it to you like the Black Lives Matter types must be. Will you bend the knee, Dumo? Will you take the knee and pledge your support to the Marxist agenda of Black Lives Matter?
No way. I'm not going to do that. But I will say that what we should do is understand that, yes, Black Lives Matter, just as all lives matter. That's how I'd put it.
Absolutely. Guys, with that being said, let me thank the both of you for joining me, and apologies to both of you keeping you waiting and being late on my broadcast. Fellas, I must say thank you, and thank you, dear viewer, for sticking with us on the show. Yeah, man, what a fantastic show. I hope you enjoyed the guests. I hope you enjoyed Gabriel Krauser. I will link the link. I'll put the link in the description of where you can read that report that he penned. And remember, you can support the Big Daddy Liberty Show. You can support me in the work that I'm doing, traveling across the country, and fighting for the ideas that actually build a free, prosperous, and property-owning society, and fighting against the ideas of the likes of the Marxist likes of your Black Lives Matter and all those other commies. Hashtag never trust a commie, as I always say. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the show. Remember, you can donate as little as $1 to the cause every month via Patreon. I am working, I keep saying this, and I'm really sorry. There's a little bit of impatience by some of you, and I get it. I am working on other ways in which you can donate. There's lots of changes coming, guys, to the Big Daddy Liberty brand, especially now that I'm on the road. I'm currently in Cape Town. I'm sure you can tell the background is a little different. And I saw some of the comments. Yes, I now have curtains. Hey man, my poverty didn't allow. But I'm now in Cape Town. I will be here in Cape Town for about 2 months as I do a lot of community outreach, community work. Really, Cape Town and the surrounding, Cape Town and the rest of the province. So if you want me to come to your part of the world, maybe do a speech, do a talk, please feel free, pop me a mail. It's as simple as you maybe even sometimes gathering 10 of your friends for a braai at your place, and I'll deliver a short address on what it is to fight the battle of ideas, what sort of ideas we should be injecting into communities, and arming you with that activist mentality of getting out there and advancing these ideas of life, liberty, and property. In addition, of course, I am shooting the docu-series, Life, Liberty, and Property. So, yeah, that's on the cards. So, thank you very much, guys, for watching the show. Remember, Lauren Mackenzie, I do see you. I will read your emails. Guys, I'm going to devote the entire rest of this week to just catching up on my admin, responding to emails, responding to inboxes to the best of my ability. Can I please recommend that if you want to get in touch with the show or me, rather send me an email. Do not inbox me on Facebook. Do not DM me on Twitter, because it becomes too much at that stage. Send me an email at bdl@bigdaddylibertyshow.com. That's bdl@bigdaddylibertyshow.com. As I keep an eye on just the final straggling comments here. Gareth H., when are you coming home? Are you saying home is in Johannesburg? I'll only be back in Johannesburg around late October, early November in reality, because from here in Cape Town, I then do the garden route up to Durban/Zululand, where I'll do the last leg of my documentary. But all of those details are coming soon. I'm gonna get my website up. There's a lot of work coming, guys, and thank you to the 201 of you now who are Patreon subscribers and donators. You are actually the people who are giving me the funds to be able to afford to hire someone who can help me put up a website, someone who can do the editing, etc., etc. Oh, there we go. Gareth saying is Enyuzet Mlazi. Soon. Actually, very soon. So, guys, I must say thank you to all of you, the 201 of you, I think now, who are Patreon subscribers. Guys, it goes a very long way. It is what I'm using for the running costs, for accommodation where I'm staying, etc., as I'm on the road. So if you want to support, guys, please tell your friends, tell your family. A single $1 a month will do it. A cup of coffee a month. And I appreciate that. Guys, remember, we stand on the show for faith, flag, family, and freedom. That is what I fight for. Those are the values that I advance in all the communities that I'll go to, whether they're rural, township, shack areas, or even suburbs. Faith, flag, family, and freedom. Those are the things that I stand for. So #stand with BDL. Join me on the Liberty Tour, the Liberty Bus Tour, and more information will come in that regard. Guys, thank you so much for watching. And as always, remember, I often say, and I'm sure many of you are are anticipating, as always, as I like to say, never trust a commie.